Bum, bum. Hey everybody, if you can see me, we're just getting going. Listen to our great theme music. That's a good rhyme. Hello. All right, everybody, we're getting going here for a second, so just give me a second to figure this all out, and we'll be with you with our friend Jeff Church, who you see there looking studious and trying to pretend that he is, an intellectual Shakespearean of great depth and knowledge. So here we are. Hey, everybody. It's Tony Estrella here. How are you doing? I am the artistic director of the GAM Theater. If you're joining us for the first time, but probably many of you are not, this is episode 9. Wow, nine weeks, even though we skipped a week. So this is our 10th week in, episode 9 of Brush Up Your Shakespeare, as the song told us. We were playing a little bit of Kiss Me Kate there, a show you probably will never see at the GAM, but the song is really, really, really catchy and gives us our title. So welcome to our guest today, Jeff Church. Hey, Jeff, how you doing?
Hey, Tony, doing good. Doing well.
Yeah, so Jeff, tell us, as I kind of maneuver through here, if I'm looking away trying to get the pop-up chat to where, there it is. Tell us where you are right now. You are live streaming from
the Burbage Theater Company. I'm sitting on the stage of Burbage right now. You see our audience behind you. Behind my camera is the set for what was going to be the 4th show of our season, In the Next Room of the Vibrant.
Yeah, Sarah Rules in the Next Room. Yeah, and so like us, yes, everybody's sets are kind of going into mothballs or something. Yeah, Jeff, for those of you who don't know Jeff, if you don't know him, you probably do. Jeff is the artistic director of the Burbage Theater. Jeff is a frequent collaborator and very important, a good friend and important collaborator with the GAM. Has been in many, many shows here, including some Shakespeare. Jeff was in with us. What were you in? Jeff, give us your short bio.
The first one was The Winter's Tales, the first show I did at the GAM. And then As You Like It a couple years ago.
Right. So 2 Shakespeare's, and what other classical or classical-ish roles have you essayed on the GAM stage?
Well, aside from on the GAM stage here at Burbage, we've done, we did 12th Night a couple years ago. We did Titus Andronicus a few years before that. I directed both of those productions. We've done Julius Caesar twice. I played Mark Antony both times with that one. We did The Taming of the Shrew, in which I played Petruchio. And then there were a few other, I played Edward II in college. It's Marlowe, contemporary of Shakespeare.
And you just directed it here. You just directed it this year at Burbage, right?
Edward II, yep.
Yes.
Yep. I played Edward in college, and then I directed it here at Burbage in January.
And your classical adjacent roles include, you directed Shakespeare in Love and played who in that?
Christopher Marlowe.
Christopher Marlowe.
Yeah.
And on the GAM stage, there was Arcadia as Septimus Hodge, and Jack in Importance of Being Earnest, right?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So Jeff has an extensive
King Elizabeth, Mortimer, and King Elizabeth.
Oh, right. Of course. How could I forget? And of course, there was King Elizabeth, which some of you may have seen, which was an adaptation of Schiller's Mary Stuart, in which Jeff played the rather ardent and passionate and maniacal, what the hell was his name?
Mortimer.
Yeah, he was a terrorist. He basically blew himself up in the whole room. And if you saw that play. So anyway, we're really happy to have Jeff here. And today we're going to be talking about, in every show, we kind of try to focus on one, speech or a couple of speeches from a particular play to talk about certain things within Shakespeare's language. And today we're going to be focusing on Henry V, which is one of his big history plays, which I had, many, many years ago on the GAM stage. And we did it both indoor and outdoor. I had the privilege of playing that part. It's one of my favorite plays. For those of you who have never seen it, I'm going to make a recommendation that you run to your, streaming service or video library and check out Kenneth Branagh's Henry V, which is he made in 1989. It's an extraordinary film. For me, it is the finest of Shakespearean cinema, and it was very, very much responsible for me putting my toe in the water and then jumping in head first into becoming an actor. It was a very inspiring piece of work for me, and it has, in talking about how we use Shakespeare's language, some of the greatest Shakespearean actors of the 20th century, many of them, from Judi Dench to, of course, Kenneth Branagh himself, to Brian Blessed, to Paul Scofield, Robert Stevens, Emma Thompson, Geraldine McEwen, the list goes on and on and on and on. And I haven't even Derek Jacobi, of course, who probably, as I've said in the show before, is probably the greatest Shakespearean actor alive, is the chorus in that. And we looked at a chorus speech several weeks back and to talk about how Shakespeare uses sound. So today we're going to talk about not only how Shakespeare uses sound, but we got two big speeches from Henry V. This is a play famous for large speeches. It's a war play. And we're going to look at Once More Unto the Breach, which is a very famous speech where the English army first arrives in Calais and on their kind of assault, their invasion of France. And it's their first big battle in a walled town, which they're attacking. And they have just put a hole in the wall of the town. So there's a breach in the wall of the town. And Henry is convinced that one more attack, the soldiers are on their last legs. They don't know if they can do it. And he has to inspire them to try to once more into the breach. He says, go through the hole in the wall and let's take over this town. That's the first one. And the second one is probably the most famous win one for the Gipper speech. It's the prototype of the kind of let's go team speech, famous St. Crispin's Day speech on the just before the Battle of Agincourt, which is the climax of the play. And we'll get to that later in the show. But the point is to look at two speeches that have to both have size to them and kind of a really focused intimacy, and how Shakespeare can always is trying to achieve both. And that and things to beware about size in Shakespeare, because often leads to bluster and hollowness. And we want to kind of find out, how do we achieve both in a theatrical way? Now, one of our challenges today is that we're in the Zoom boxes. And so we are constrained by this frame that is around us right here. And we'll talk about how I think we can actually learn something from that as actors for the stage, that we can still do both even within this box, even though this isn't the audience that we would typically play Henry V for. So we're going to get going with Once More Unto the Breach. Now, just a reminder, as I always try to do at the top, is what we're focusing on in these shows are how to use Shakespeare's language for the actor, and how to inflect for the audience, meaning how do we allow the audience in? How do we share this with the audience? And for the audience, how does the audience kind of lean forward without fear, without anxiety that they're not going to get it? Because if we're doing our job and you're doing your job and we meet somewhere in the middle, we're probably going to be able to follow this right on through, and not only follow it plot-wise and know what happens next, but to really kind of understand why Shakespeare is Shakespeare, why he is the greatest writer, not just why they tell us he's the greatest writer, but what's unique about his language and writing, and how it can kind of actually, if the actor is doing his and her job, move us, and that we can always stay with it. And so we're going to keep kind of going back to some of the fundamentals we've talked about, even as we explore certain new topics maybe that we haven't focused on as much in other episodes. So I just want a little bit of a reminder of what some of those are. We talked a couple of weeks back, and we were about 4 C words that we're going to look at that are always important to think about for actors. And the first of those was coining. And we talked a lot about coining in a couple of previous episodes back. I think it was when Nora was with us, and it was about being present and discovering that in the moment. So that's something we always kind of want to be doing as an actor. But particularly today, what we're going to be looking at is the next two, which is chewing. This is how we articulate. Yeah, and really chew on the language, that we have, think of words as a meal, and how we savor them and feast them and use our articulators to get everything out of them that Shakespeare's putting us in there, and making our acting actually much easier because it's actually in the word itself. That includes onomatopoeia, but it also includes the way that we chew on consonants and sustain vowels. So we want to kind of think about that. I'm going to ask Jeff to think about that as he's going through it today. And then carving as well. Carving, of course, in carving the speech is that sometimes, especially in the big speeches with Shakespeare, we can paint them with a very, very broad brush. So we get once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more close the wall up with our English dead, in peace there's still nothing, so becomes a man. And it just goes on and on like a flood of language that doesn't carve, doesn't stop and start and turn corners sharply, and then keep waking our ear up. Yeah. And then the way an actor can do that, and some of the ways we can do that, we've talked about a lot. And one we're going to talk about particularly today, that probably are the most important, is how we build an argument with antithetical thinking. Yeah, weighing one thing or one word or one phrase against another. That's how we build arguments. Shakespeare does it all the time. And then using pitch as well, and how pitch can help delineate for an audience. And if an actor isn't using pitch, which is something that American actors often have a really hard time with. We speak, as Jeff nods his head, we speak in 1 or 2 notes and we stay down here. And if I don't have that delineation where I can kind of inflect for you, again, I love that word inflect, it's an invitation. If I can inflect for you how to hear what I'm saying. Yeah. So that's something we're going to look at as well. And we'll keep going through that and adding things to that, because it's never, this isn't like a, a recipe. We just add the kind of things and it always comes out right. It's a constant negotiation with each kind of challenge that Shakespeare's text asks us. But it's not an obstacle. It's not a hurdle. It's not something that we should kind of be fight shy of. We should embrace it, because often in that challenge, in that obstacle, what he's doing is actually telling us how to act it. And so we'll look for the clues in here as well. So Jeff is going to be our Henry V today. And we want to start with the speech. So I just gave him a little context about it, right? That famously in the Branagh'he thing, he's on a horse and there's an explosion behind him and the horse rears up and then he comes galloping down and goes, So we don't have an army for Jeff to yell over, which is always, we've done this in class, right? We all the students to yell at whoever's playing Henry to see if he or she can kind of, get over them and have something. So we don't have that today, and I'm not going to do that to Jeff because it'll get all crazy on the audio of this shit audio we have here. But let's just take this language, Jeff, and start with the first, and I'm going to start and stop with you, and we're going to just kind of try to make our way through this big opening where he tries to, action-wise, can never want to forget action, right? What is he doing here? And is this first beat about getting his army's attention? How does he gather the people to him? Let's see if we can do that with his first couple of lines.
Sure. Once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more, or close the wall up with our English dead.
Great, period, yeah. That's the first sentence. It's 2 verse lines. So let's talk about that first verse line. I'm going to show you. I have this marvelous book here this is giant copy. I think I showed once before of Henry V. And when I'm not wearing my glasses because they glare on the Zoom world, it's large print. So it really, really helps. There's a picture you can see in this book of, that's a still from Laurence Olivier's incredible version of this from 1940. And that's the St. Crispin's Day speech, which we're going to see later. And I just want to read the dedication of this book, which was printed, I believe, in the 50s. This edition is dedicated to Laurence Olivier, for whom it is now obvious the Bard of Avon wrote this picture play. Isn't that amazing? That's better than any kind of award you get. And if anybody deserved it, certainly was Lord Olivier. So right at the top here, we've talked about another aspect of Shakespeare, which is a very important one, which is the iambic pentameter rhythm, right? And that means each verse line is 10 syllables and that heartbeat, the dot, the dot, the dot, the dot, the dot. And here we've got once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more, or close the wall up with our English dead, right? Now, of course, Jeff isn't saying it that way, or nor would anybody act it that way, because what we find in here is this is a very heavily stressed line. It doesn't want to stay to that heartbeat. It wants to do something else. Jeff, in that first line, once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more, out of those 10 syllables, how many would you say are stressed in there?
Oh, geez. Once and more are both stressed as their own phrase, probably. Unto the breach, dear friends, once more. I mean, almost every syllable in the line is stressed.
Yeah, isn't that great? It's one of the heaviest stress lines. Yeah, it may not be total, but if you do once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more, what is it, 6 or 7 stresses, right? Yeah, that's a lot. And so that's Shakespeare telling us that clearly, even if you just instinctually go to that line, that this is heavy, this is big, this needs to project, this needs to reach into a huge group of men who are, again, tired on their last legs, maybe unwilling to fight. Indeed, successfully, he gets them to charge in, except for 3 guys run the other way because, they think that they're probably smart, the smart ones, the clowns. Or close the wall up with our English dead. So this is a challenge to them as well, right? So just what this means is everybody go to the breach, right? And if we don't do it, that breach is going to be covered with our corpses, right? That's a fair assessment of what that means. So it's almost a warning too, is there a choice in this for the army, right? So don't worry now about size or anything, because again, we're in the Zoom box, but as if we take all the feeling of that size and focus it down as if you were talking to one person.
Sure.
Yeah. For those 2 lines.
Once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more, or close the wall up with our English dead.
Yeah. Now go back on that again and one more time, and think of the verbs in there. We've closed the wall up. Yeah. Yeah, unto there's no real verb in that first sentence, but close the wall up. How that image changes. Know that the verse line ends on once more, and that you've got to find your way back into a different momentum into that second line. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah,
Yeah.
try it one more time.
Once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more, or close the wall up with our English dead.
Boom, something else happens and we turn. Yes, now we're on to a different beat in the speech, yeah? The next thing he's talking to the army and he says, in peace, he starts to describe the whys and wherefores of getting. Now he's got their attention. Now they're like, I don't know. He hasn't won them over yet, right? The action isn't complete. If he really wants them to do this, he's got to do more here, yeah? And so he takes a certain tactic and he starts to talk about, and he immediately builds an antithetical argument, right? Right? Peace and war, what peace is like and what war is like. And right now, these are the rules of where we are. It is war. So take us through this next bit, Jeff, if you wouldn't mind. In peace.
In peace, there's nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility. But when the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action of the tiger.
Good, that's great. And you hear that, right? I mean, you hear that antithetical is fantastic. And Jeff, you did a great job with that because we heard, but when the blast of war blows in our ears, right? We get it in peace. There nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility. And pitch-wise, I've got to connect war to peace, right? In peace, there nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility. But when the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action of the tiger, right? So all of a sudden, it's fantastic. We get this kind of setup of what peace is like and what is necessary in war. And now he's going to explain, right, what is necessary in war, the animalistic nature of what we have to do in order to accomplish this, right? So modest humility. And we can't forget in all of this, and this is the trap in this speech, that it's so big and it has to be projected out and fill a theater that we can lose the subtlety of some of the language that he's using in here. There's something about peace and modest humility, yeah? That is an interesting thing that we can actually use the sound of those words, modest humility. But when the blast, great verb of war, blows in, then things start to get stronger. Stress changes, the rhythm changes, right? So as we look at that, we can still color those words without kind of losing them in the wash of size. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Try that one more time, Jeff, will you? From
Sure.
In peace.
There's also something really nice here in the line of chewing and carving with as modest stillness and humility. On the page, you see modest with the ST at the end of it. And then the next word, stillness, begins with the same sound. So the tendency for us is going to be to say modest stillness.
Right.
You know, combine those two words. But if you're chewing and carving and bringing the language out as much as you want to, you say modest stillness and humility.
Yeah.
So you get the whole idea.
Right, because it isn't just stillness, it's modest stillness, and that's important. That's a great, I love that. I love that. Yes, so chew, chew, chew away.
Okay. In peace, there's nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility. But when the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action of the tiger.
Good, right. So let's go on that list. And now we're going to tell what a tiger is, right?
Yep.
Well, how can a man become a tiger is the next beat of this, yeah? So what is that? What is the action of a tiger? And he goes on to describe it very, very vividly here. And this is a way of inspiring, you know, this kind of gets to the point of where you see, you know, to take a very, very non-war image, but, you know, football players at halftime, you know, banging their helmets together to try to get each other kind of their blood up. And he's about to use that very language. Take us through this next list here.
Sure. Imitate the action of the tiger. Stiffen the sinews, summon up the blood, disguise fair nature with hard-favored rage. Then lend the eye a terrible aspect.
Good, that's great. That's really, no, it's really great. You did a wonderful job with that antithetical thing in the middle of that too. Again, we talked about antithesis, how Shakespeare builds arguments with opposites. In here, he says, stiffen the sinews, summon up the blood, disguise fair nature with hard favored rage. He's going back to in peace and in war, right? Doesn't mean you have to change to that you aren't fair natured, but you have to, as he uses the word, disguise, right? So it's almost a reminder to the morality of these soldiers, right? Which is interesting that you don't have to, you know, become, you know, it's what happens with PTSD, right? It's like they can't differentiate anymore. He's asking them to somehow compartmentalize, you know, not to lose their humanity, but at the same time override it because the blast of war is blowing in your ears. You know, the tiger doesn't kill for sport, right?
Mm-hmm.
The tiger kills to eat. Yeah.
Right.
And that's what we're in a survival thing now. Yeah. So that I love that. And we get that language where we can do that with this language. This is so rich with sound and onomatopoetic, right? Stiffen is a stiff word. The sinews, right? We can do with sinews. We can feel what those things are. We can see them in the neck when it comes out stiffen, right? You can see that. This summon up the blood, yeah, is different. And then you did a great thing with your pitch change for disguise fair nature with hard favored rage. The pitch really allows me to hear the argument. Again, this is a list of things. Shakespeare loves to do this. It has to climb in momentum, but it also has to be different. Each item in the list is different than the one that precedes it and the one that comes after it. We have to make sure the audience can hear them all as individual things to build the argument versus hearing them as one wash. You could get through the speech and the audience would be fine if they went, yes, he's inspiring the soldiers, but that's not why we come to Shakespeare. Yeah, we come to Shakespeare to hear those words, the greatest kind of words in the English language, and to be enlivened by them, to be enriched by them, each phrase versus thought by thought versus just a wash of it's Shakespeare, right? No good.
The nuance of thought. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So disguise fair nature with then lend the eye a terrible aspect. Now he's going to really get visual here for these guys, right? He's going to actually tell them how to arrange their face, right? As the old Erasmus would say. What is this? Describe this for us. Let it pry.
Then let pry through the portage of the head. So you want me to just go through it or talk through it?
Yeah, take it from let it pry through the portage of the head.
Okay. Let it pry through the portage of the head like the brass cannon. Let the brow o'erwhelm it as fearfully as doth a galled rock overhang and jutty his confounded base, swilled with the wild and wasteful ocean.
Yeah, good. And you did something great there with the ocean. Yeah, you lose breath in that, right? If you don't know score, really look at the verse line there, because what happens is he doesn't allow you a breath. It's one long sentence, and it seems like it wants to be done on one breath. So like, how does the verse line help us there with phrasing? Now, again, that may sound like a little inside baseball, but for the actor, it's very important. Shakespeare gives us that 10 beat line, which at the end of every line, it's not that we need to take a breath necessarily, but there is a small space there. There's a hitch between that allows us to kind of find our breath in the phrasing and know that that's going to be mostly one thought at a time. Yeah. Let it pry through the portage of the head, end of line, right? Like the brass cannon. Now, even though if that were prose, it would be let it pry through the portage of the head like the brass cannon, right? We would just run right through that stop. What if we obey the verse line a little bit and discover, coin, like what? Like the brass cannon, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
He's not necessarily coming in with this prepared. So if he takes a slight thing to say, let it pry, he starts to make the image to the portage of the head. Now he's obviously already got brass cannon somewhere in his subconscious because he says portage, right? And so this is this is a British warship image, right? This is an image of the porthole opening and the brass cannon being shoved out as naval combat is kind of engaged, right? You can picture that, if you're a Patrick O'Brien fan like me, go watch Master and Commander and they boom, go up the thing. Here comes the brass cannon and bang, 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 bang. He's saying, let the brow of your head become that. He said, turn them into actual fighting machines, weapons of mass destruction, each individual piece of this army. He's really asking them to take this on, to literally do what he's saying, which is to stiffen the sinews, get the, what does he say? The brow, forehead villainous low, right? Time to become, as he says, I think of Caliban. To become a warrior, to become a soldier. Yeah. So let's see, take it. You can slow this down because they've got to really hear it. And again, focus this for the one person you're talking to. Yeah.
Then lend the eye a terrible aspect. Let pry through the portage of the head like the brass cannon. Let the brow o'erwhelm it as fearfully as doth a galled rock overhang and jutty his confounded base, swilled with a wild and wasteful ocean.
Yeah, good. And what Jeff just did there with that ocean is he added a slight, like kind of almost a third syllable, which is great because when we talk about this line here, this is another thing for actors out there. Shakespeare is, tells us something with how he breaks rhythm. And in here we get, let it pry through the portage of the head like the brass cannon, let the brow o'erwhelm it. These are all 10, basically, they're not regular, but they're 10 syllable lines, as fearfully as doth a galled rock. Now he says galled rather than galled, so that rhythm keeps. If he said galled rock, right? We say galled, We say gall, we use that word. You have the gall to, I was galled by your, right? And so but in order to fill the line out, as fearfully as doth the galled rock, right? You add that ed, which helps the rhythm of the line stay, because he's on a train. If all of a sudden he has said, as fearfully as doth the galled rock, something seems to have kind of come apart in the middle, right? It doesn't have the same weight of the line. Now, an audience might not necessarily always get that, but there's something about how that rhythm carries us and how it trains an audience's ear that's very important, and that Shakespeare wants us to obey. And in the very, 2 lines later, he says, as fearfully as doth the galled rock, o'erhang and jutty his confounded base, right? Or hang and jutty his confounded base, swilled with the wild and wasteful ocean. Now there's missing a syllable, it's only 9 syllables. So what Jeff just did, which was great, he's already thinking ahead, is he gave ocean a bigger emphasis, right? He put shun, almost as if he had said ocean, yeah? Now that might be a little, going that far to say ocean, make it into hollow Shakespeare land. But if the actor thinks that I've got to fill that extra syllable with ocean, he's also making the image of the ocean, right, very visible to me in my mind's eye, as an audience member, which is great. Swilled. So we've got this image that he creates of the eye peering through the portrait of the head like a cannon, right? And then he goes to like if you picture a kind of a rock island, right, where the water has eroded the base and is swirling around it, but there's this jutty, there's this piece sticking out of it, almost daring the water to take it down, right, but still out there taking the brunt of the storm. That's what he wants to turn his men into. But it's got to be swilled with the wild and wasteful ocean, right? It's got to carry out versus ocean, right, which just goes, oh, sad. And it doesn't, well, formally, right? If I'm his guys, and if I'm one of his guys and I'm like, yeah, I like the speech, and he goes ocean, I'm like, didn't have it in him to get to the end of the line. Maybe I don't want to follow him through the breach. He can go by himself, right? So that was great that you did that. That makes really great sense and helps me. And even if I don't get it intellectually, subconsciously, it hits me. I'm there with the form of it. It's thrilling,
Also, it'd be fun to note right now that from in peace, there's nothing so becomes a man, through swilled with the wild and wasteful ocean. That is a single sentence. For those of you who aren't that on paper. So we talk about breath a little bit. That's
why we've got to watch our breath. Sometimes you could get 8, 9 lines in a row, first lines with that's one sentence. And that not only do we have to make sure we have our breath to phrase it properly using the verse line, but we also have to really think about pitch, which we talked a lot about last week with our Hamlet speech, in delineating so the audience could follow. Again, what is important is always what happens, right? The clarity of what the plot is of the speech. And we have to get, in order to do that, we have to get the subject, the verb, and the object of every sentence. No matter what ornament is around it, we've got to get the subject, the verb, and the object. And Jeff did a great job with that. Yes, so let's go back. We've got some people chiming in here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Please send any questions you have or thoughts. Jeff, this is from Jennifer. What's a dream role you haven't performed yet in a Shakespeare play? What's the Hamlet? Oh yeah, that's the easiest answer you've ever had in your life.
Or this one. I mean, yeah. Hamlet's certainly at the top of the list, though. I've been trying to make that happen for a while.
I have no doubt you will. Yeah, it's going to be, well, who knows now? It's going to be socially distanced, one-man Jeff Church busking Hamlet at a bus stop near you. Yeah. Oh, is that Jeff down at the Ripta station doing I'd go. Me and our friends are, down with the pigeons. That was an easy one. Audrey says, when approaching these show-stopping monologues, what's the balance between a thing being described and the feelings of the speaker? Feelings can sometimes obstruct the words. It's a great point, Audrey. Thank you. What do you think about that?
Well, the modern acting theory and everything that comes from Stanislavski says that the emotional quality of the thing should be a product and not something that develops simultaneously with the language. So the language happens and what's the word? And engenders emotion. So it shouldn't be something that you're like, if you're pushing and you're trying to go for making an emotional appointment. I don't know if you've used that phrase, or like deciding that there's an emotional response somewhere in the text that you have to reach, then you're doing a disservice to yourself and the text. The text should be the thing that engenders that. You should find it as a means of working with the text. And I found that if you usually work in that process, that it's the emotion will seem as coming in the wake of the text as opposed to overpowering it or stepping on it or moving past it.
Yeah, that it's a question we often talk about in classes as both a student and someone who has the privilege of teaching acting. It's a very delicate one. I think we get very nervous actors around emotional appointments, as Jeff just pointed out. You know, if the script says he or she cries, it's like, oh Jesus, how am I going to do that? So what that leads to, and Jeff is absolutely right, and that wonderful way to articulate that. And Shakespeare makes it easier for us actually, because the language is so rich. If the language is actually engendering the emotion, meaning if we're truly listening to ourselves and we're allowing the focus of our energies in the language, in the production of language itself, it will engender emotional response, right? Versus trying to do what I often try to use as a way of explaining this to students is the 2-track method, right? Which is like looking at an old film strip, not, we see this much anymore, but an old film strip's like a 35mm strip of film that you would, project a movie on. You look at the image would grow in a series of images, 24 frames per second or whatever going through. And then along the line is a black line that runs along the side where the audio track is kind of put onto the film, right? And that is synced up with the actor speaking in the image. They're two actual separate things. Now, when we watch a movie, we see them as one and we think it was just recorded live, but it's actually recorded in two separate ways, and then synced up. Which is why if you've ever been on a film set and they always click the clapper, is about that clap to say before they say action is about syncing sound with image, right? Now, we all know the frustration of watching, especially on DVDs, et cetera, and other streaming things, when the sound, and might be happening right now to Jeff and I, who knows, that what we're saying isn't matching up with our lips. And when that happens, we just don't know where to look. And I think essentially that's what an actor's doing when he or she tries to do both at once. Like, we've got the emotion in our head, we're saying our lines, and we're thinking in another part of our brain that here comes the sad part, or here comes the angry part. And we try to kind of match the two, and we try to be our own clapper and sync them together. It doesn't usually work. One focus is our best, right? One focus being on the language, on our action, and allowing that the actual production of the speech and the contemplation and the execution of the action to be the thing that engenders it. So it's hard with this language, for instance, this speech alone. It's so heavily stressed. It's filled with action verbs. It's an incredibly high-pitched speech. It's hard not to feel what he's saying. He has to feel what he's asking them to feel. So Henry, in the middle of this, to say stiffen the sinews, you actually have to stiffen sinews, right? So so much of Shakespeare's genius, I think in particular, lies in the way that form and content come together. Stiffen the sinews, summon up the blood. It's actually happened to me. My blood is summoning. My blood pressure is rising when I'm doing the speech, right? All of that. When I do this and the eyes prying out of my head and all of that stuff, if I actually enact those physical actions, they help me say the image. And the image is being created completely through language. We don't have to the physicalization of it is just, part and parcel to the language itself. So I hope that, probably too long-winded, but I hope that was a way of answering your question. So back to the speech for a second. I love this too. Now he's going to tell him what, he's going to continue this. He gets away from the rock and the swirling wild, wasteful. You are a rock in the middle of the ocean, right? This metaphor he uses, and now he's going to be very, very direct. Let's go with the next part.
Now, set the teeth and stretch the nostril wide. Hold hard the breath and bend up every spirit to his full height. On, you noblest English.
Good, right. So he's got it right. Let's stop there. That's next thing. He just says, if you didn't get that metaphor, if it got lost in the explosion, right, about the rock and the water and the thing, let me just explain it to you, right? Which is set the teeth, and we have to do that when we say it. We stretch the nostril wide. Hold hard the breath. We almost can say on an intake too. It's like, in Henry IV, part 1, Lady Percy says to Hotspur, right? About when she says, who's a soldier like Henry, and who actually is killed by Henry when he was Hal in the story, was a great soldier, and he has PTSD, and she's describing what's happening to him as he sleeps, and she says, you hold your breath as if in some great and sudden hest. It's like all of a sudden he's waking out of sleep like that. And that's hold hard the breath. It's like rising, filling your chest with air, getting ready for, building up your own personal armor. Yeah. And bend up every spirit, right? Everything about you, all your senses to its full, or he uses the masculine full height. that's in the middle of a line, but it's no stop. And then it has to go right to the on, because now they're getting riled up, you noblest English. And then we're going to get a little intimate with them. Yeah. So now he's got them rise. He says to his full height, exclamation point, on, you noblest English. They're like, yeah, I think I can do it, but I'm not quite there yet. And he goes for the heart. He changes gears. And this is carving. Again, if this gets lost in the kind of, if it's all inspire my troops, inspire is not an action because it requires a consequence on the part of the other person. You can't guarantee they're going to be inspired. Yeah. So if you go about trying to inspire, you usually end up failing, you know? So what might be the action here? It changes over the course, right? The intention certainly is to get them to charge the wall, you know, but how do we do that? He uses many different actions in here, right? Actually, as he'll do in the St. Crispin's Day speech. So at this point, what do you think he's up to?
Well, I mean, with what comes next, I mean, on you noblest English, I would want to use the word like to conjure and then qualify it, because he's gonna kind of conjure the image of the noble nature of their fathers fighting on the same ground. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
use that. He's going to invoke in them, you know, a nostalgia, a kind of memory that says, so how do we, you know, and we'll talk about this later with St. Crispin's. Is it thanking them on some level too, with this is your legacy is this, it's connecting to them to a legacy, right? Which is important, you know, that their fathers did this. He's going to talk about mom too, right? So this is a family affair now. And this is going to lead later, we hear very famously in St. Crispin's Day, we band of brothers, right? So he gets personal now. So we change gears from the big exclamation point. So see if you can do that from now set the teeth and then change gears to the intimacy of this next bit.
Okay. Now, set the teeth and stretch the nostril wide. Hold hard the breath and bend up every spirit to his full height. On, you noblest English, whose blood is fet from fathers of war proof. Fathers that, like so many Alexanders, have in these parts from morn till even fought and sheathed their swords for lack of argument.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And the very next thing is dishonor not your mothers, right? Yeah, it's like so great. He goes from fathers, and not only fathers who did what you are doing now, but were in a worse shape right here. I love the way Jeff did a great thing right there. He really carved that beautifully, because I actually so often gets gone over, which is have in these parts. He actually separated it with pitch. He says have in these parts, right? Put parentheses around it. So we know that he's talking about the very same battleground, right? This is, I believe, in Calais, and which was sometimes an English possession and sometimes not. So there were many battles fought here. And he's looking at a guy and saying, your dad 20 years ago was right where you are right now, you know, and did this. Yeah. And in these parts. And so we're making this English connection. He says, and he calls them noble, right? You noblest English. And it's every class we know this from earlier in the play of the country is represented here. Yeah. So I love that, having these parts. And then the next thing is dishonor not your mothers, which is another turn. And is, you know, I wonder, Jeff, is that's actually kind of funny to me, right? That he does all this and then he says, dishonor not your mothers, like it's like, you know, it says that those whom you call fathers did beget you, right? That you are worthy of these guys. Don't make your mothers out to be, you know, questionable in their morals, right? Which is an interesting note in the middle of all of this. Again, goes to action. How do you get somebody to do what you want to do? Is it by just the bluster of I say it, so it goes, I'm the king, do this, or all of a sudden I'm connecting with you, and in the middle of all this, I can both invoke your love for your father and make a joke at the same time about like how much, and knowing that how much you love your mother. You know what I mean? It's amazing that note. So I want to see if we can go back a little bit just to get that. Then we'll probably move on at St. Crispin's Day so we don't run out of time. But now set the teeth, stretch the nostril wide. Then the change that the carving was great, changing into whose blood is fet. Yeah. And then see if we can go into dishonor not your mothers. Yeah.
Can I just say one quick thing?
Absolutely.
With the teeth and stretch the nostril wide, and the phrase, whose blood is fet from fathers of war proof. Yeah. Like alliteration consonants in those lines, like the hard T's with set the teeth and stretch the nostril, you know? Yeah. Fet from fathers of war proof. Like these are—
Isn't that great? Yeah.
So much fun with that.
Yeah. And you did in that, and you could hear it. And it's not necessarily something that we go, oh, he's overdoing the alliteration. It's part of what Shakespeare wants. He puts those in there for a reason, because they help the line actually land, you know? And if you pay attention to them and actually embrace them as stressing them from fathers of war proof, fathers that like so many Alexander, right, have in these from more until even fought, right? The F comes back. And so again, looking at Shakespeare's language for everything, we talk about that's part of chewing, right? Which helps the carving. So the coining is it's happening in the present. The chewing is that we're looking for all of those little indications he gives us in there, in those, the sound, the sustain of the vowels and the crunch of the consonants, and then the alliteration of how he's marrying words together. Those are all telling us something about the trajectory of the speech and what it means. And again, form and content coming together. So as Jeff explores that, and in that I heard it, and he's galvanized, he's focusing my energy by focusing the language. He's zeroing in on me and making me kind of really kind of give him everything I've got. As he says, bend up all of my spirits to his full height, or to my full height, based on the use of language. I love that, Jeff. Thank you. So one more time with that and see if we can get this a little bit of humor in here with Dishonor Not Your Mothers.
Sure. From on, or now set the
on.
On, you noblest English, whose blood is fet from fathers of war proof. Fathers that, like so many Alexanders, have in these parts from morn till even fought and sheathed their swords for lack of argument. Dishonor not your mothers. Now attest that those whom you called fathers did beget you.
Good. Yeah, that's great, isn't it? It's fun.
Oh, it's fun.
Yeah. It's like all you just change. You go, you don't make me, I heard things about your mother, no, it's great. That's not a waka joke. It's just an acknowledgement of humanity, right? Acknowledgement of something in the middle of this. There's a great moment. I think we chatted about this before, but as a kid, I was a big San Francisco 49er fan. And many of you, if you're a football fan, you know who Joe Montana is, a very famous quarterback. And they were in the Super Bowl, and it was the end of the game, and there was like 90 seconds left, and they had to go almost 100 yards to win the game. And they were all nervous, and they didn't know if they could do it. And their backs were against the wall. And in the huddle, in the timeout, he's supposed to be calling a play, and he looks over, it's the Super Bowl, there's a lot of famous people, and he says to the guys in the huddle, and he goes, "Hey, isn't that John Candy over there?" And they're like, what is he talking about? Because they were so nervous, and that broke the mood. And it was just a little bit of like, hey, let's all calm the hell down and try to just do this. We're going to do our best. And just by acknowledging this kind of funny kind of thing in the middle of it that seemed absurd at the time, helped to refocus their energies and kind of put them in the right mindset to do what they had to do. Now, I'm not saying that joke won the game, but it certainly helped to put the guys all in the right frame of mind. And so this little bit in here is a wonderful kind of note. And we always need to be looking for those as actors, right? And we should expect them as the audience, which is, how does any speech spin against the way it drives, to invoke Mr. David Milch and Herman Melville, right? Like, meaning it seems to want to go one way, but if we play it all in that one way, it gets very melodramatic. We're coloring it with one brush. Where are the points of light? Where are the changes? What's going to surprise me? That's what keeps the audience's ear alive. All of a sudden, that little bit of kind of humor, joke, personal touch in the middle of this. We know Harry has a great personal touch with people, right? And this is a great way for him to show that, and for us to kind of lean forward into it and be part of that huddle with him, then want to follow him. I think he has to win the audience over with this as well, right? So now we're going to get to this in the end, unfortunately, because I want to kind of get a little bit on the second speech. We're going to jump ahead now and look at a similar speech in some ways, but very different, because it doesn't have the bombast and kind of aggressive energy required of this, of Once More Into the Breach. To a little context, later in the play, this is the eve of the battle of, not the eve, it's right before the Battle of Agincourt, and the soldiers are very nervous, and that they're outnumbered 5 to 1. They're probably all going to die, and or most of them, and yet the battle is going to go forward anyway. And then one of Henry's top guys, Westmoreland, is chatting with another top guy and says, "I wish, he says, that we now had here but 1/10,000 of those men in England who do no work today." So if we had 1/10,000 of the people who are sitting on their asses back home, we'd have an army big enough to win this battle, right? And Henry overhears this and uses it as a springboard for the Joe Montana huddle speech. Now, this is the win one for the Gipper that we all go to. You'll hear famous lines in this that you recognize. If you've seen any crappy action movies like Independence Day, when the aliens are about to blow up the world, Bill Pullman as the president kind of gets on TV or wherever he gets in that world and says, and goes, we can beat the aliens, and gives a rah-rah speech to rally everybody. And we do, we beat the aliens. Nice to have people who can, that you want to fight behind in high leadership, positions of high leadership. Wouldn't that be nice? So
now it's also important to note that there are, in this situation, a lot more aliens than there are English.
And they don't even need, you could have one alien, and if the alien's got some kind of like mega laser beam or something, this is just like, there's a lot more aliens, and they're fighting on home turf, and they have better weapons, and they're not tired and hungry. They're ready to go. It's going to be a slaughter. And so again, Westmoreland says, I wish we had 10,000 of those, because we're all going to die. And Henry says, how does Henry reply?
What's he that wishes so? My cousin Westmoreland? No, my fair cousin. If we are marked to die, we are enough to do our country loss. And if to live, the fewer men, the greater share of honor. God's will, I pray thee, wish not one man more. By Jove, I am not covetous.
Let's see if we can turn the corner there. That's great. That's great. When he gets to, again, the personal comes in. We get something that seems general. He says that Westmoreland uses a springboard to kind of make a point to everybody. And then it gets very personal, right? Because he uses the I in there. When I pray thee, wish not one man more. And then he's going to go into I, by Jove, I am not covetous for gold, right? And so it's as if he just takes somebody by the scruff of the neck and looks them in the eye and says, yeah, this is what it is. And I'm going to give up everything I have. I'm going to lead by example. And we get an interesting kind of look at the conception about what honor means as well, not only as reward, but as personal dignity and integrity. Yeah. So on this part, again, the intimacy is really important. I think, changing gears here with the by Jove, I am not covetous. Just make it just for Westmoreland.
Okay. From right there?
Yeah.
By Jove, I am not covetous for gold, nor care I who doth feed upon my cost. It yearns me not if men my garments wear. Such outward things dwell not in my desires, but if it be a sin to covet honor.
Yeah, honor. And then that's great. So just put it, and I love how you put the circle around honor, because that is as Falstaff says, honor is the subject of my speech, right? You know what I mean? It always is. But if it be a sin to covet honor, right? And again, not just reward, the honor that you get by being a hero and people kind of parade you down the street on Memorial Day. No, the honor, it comes with having integrity, and get rid of the material things and go for what's important, right? If it be a sin to covet honor, and I cut you off there, I should have let you finish that. So take it from right from there. But if it be a sin to covet honor.
But if it be a sin to covet honor, I am the most offending soul alive. No, faith, my cuz, wish not a man from England. God's peace, I would not lose so great an honor as one man more, methinks, would share from me for the best hope I have. Oh, do not wish one more.
Now you skipped over there. That's good, but don't try to naturalize that. There's a big O in the middle of that. Yeah. We talked a lot on the show about the O's, right? And he's got a line here that says, for the best hope I have, period, O, do not wish one more. O, exclamation point, do not wish one more. Or O at least goes into it. So what is that O there, do you think? What happens in that O? It's a good opportunity for us versus trying to overnaturalize it.
We talk about emotion, right? The O is that kind of like a vocalization of emotion there, right? So it's a pivoting point. As one man more, methinks, would share from me for the best hope I have. Oh, do not wish one more.
Yeah. Yeah. It almost becomes like he's warming to the idea so much that he actually seems like he's going to want less men, like he's going to fire the army so the three of us can win, and we're the honorable ones, It becomes, yeah. I got an idea.
Don't wish one more. No.
Yeah. So there's something about that again, that Shakespeare does these things all these time, these little kind of nonverbal almost things that sometimes in our ability to make it, our kind of contemporary kind of habit to make it natural, we kind of do a you know, like we just skip through it. That Jeff's initial instinct, mine would be too, it's the same thing. It's about, oh, make it real. You know what I mean? And ironically, making it real means really paying attention to those things and seeing, trying, at least in rehearsal, why does Shakespeare put that there? And what might it tell me about the meaning of the line? Yeah. What opportunity does it afford versus seeing it as a kind of a Shakespeareism that we should try to avoid? Most of the time, occasionally, I'll admit, I get rid of the coney catching jokes too. You know what I mean? But the O's, don't cut those. They're worth their weight in gold. You just can't be afraid of them. You have to kind of grab your, you know, and jump. You know what I mean? You have to kind of be brave as an actor and really embrace those. The howl, howl, howls, right? The O's. There's so many of them in there. Yeah. So that O is great. Do not wish one more. And then he says, rather proclaim it, that they go out and do it. You know, so I want to skip ahead a little bit in the speech because we're going to run out of time here. We only got 10 minutes left.
This day,
yeah, is called can we go to that? So this is he's gathered them. He gets through. He says, if you don't want to be here, I don't want to be with you. If it's only 5 of us, that's what it's going to be. And then he gets everybody is around him. And then he tells them what's special about today.
This day is called the Feast of Crispian. He that outlives this day and comes safe home will stand a tiptoe when the day is named and rouse him at the name of Crispian. He that shall live this day and see old age will yearly on the vigil feast his neighbors and say, tomorrow is Saint Crispian. Then will he strip his sleeve and show his scars and say, these wounds I had on Crispin's day. Old men forget, yet all shall be forgot, but he'll remember with advantages what feats he did that day. Then shall our names, familiar in his mouth as household words, Harry the King, Bedford and Exeter, Warwick and Talbot, Salisbury and Gloucester, be in their flowing cups freshly remembered. This story shall the good man teach his son, and Crispian shall ne'er go by from this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered. We few. We happy few. We, band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Be he ne'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition. And gentlemen in England, now abed, shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, whiles any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's day.
Yeah. Hard to do that ending in the Zoom box with nobody, you know. Yeah. To the Brady Bunch audience we usually see in these things. That was great, Jeff. Thank you for really slowly and deliberately taking us through all of those amazing thoughts as well. There's so much in there. We won't have time to go through all of this. But you might have, you know, those of you who are maybe not familiar with this play are probably recognizing some things you hear in there. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers comes from the speech, right? Which was something we hear often. HBO made a long series about World War II called Band of Brothers. It's an image, a war image, an image of camaraderie and intimacy and sacrifice that we often associate with war comes from the speech. And he's talking about this holiday of St. Crispin. You know, it's not a holiday we I believe it's in October. It's not a holiday that we celebrate really anymore, but it was one of the holy days, many holy days in the church calendar. And it's a way of him thanking, right? I think the action is safe to say, and the speech is really thanking these men as he goes through this. He even goes so far as to name them one by one. This is something that is very important. Not all of them, because obviously it's a full army here, but in using the people he does talk to, he by being more specific and personal, he makes it more universal, right? And he starts by saying his own name, but he doesn't say the name of the play is The Life of King Henry V, right? What does he call himself?
Harry.
Right.
Harry.
And we know that Harry is a different name. Harry is a name of someone you hang out with at a bar. And of course, when he was Harry, when he was Hal, he was often hanging out in a bar. And he knows how to be, and he's erasing, right, class distinction here, right? He's saying, I will lead by example. And this is the version of honor we were talking about earlier. And the personal touch here is really, earlier the chorus says, a little touch of Harry in the night. that has the ability, and because it's genuine, to go one by one through each of these guys, and to say, I am you and you are me. Even though we live in a world in which these hierarchies exist, and this battlefield, everybody's equal. This is what we're doing today, and we're doing it for each other. Yeah. Harry the King, Bedford, Exeter. He goes through all of these names, which is something this play does a lot to represent an army. Remember, the chorus says, think you when we speak of horses that you see them, and one man make 1,000, because we've only got 5 guys on each side, right? And so by evoking these names and they're all different guys too, and it's hard right now to do in the Zoom box with no actors that you would be, normally in this scene, we're talking to each other and you're gonna grab someone by the face and but that's a list of names, and it's important that Bedford and Exeter, Warwick and Talbot, Salisbury and Gloucester all mean different things because they have a different relationship with the actor playing Henry, right? That Henry has a different relationship with those characters, and that has to be infused into their names. They have wonderful names: Exeter, Salisbury. Yeah, there's stuff to play with in there that an actor, back again to Audrey's great question, can communicate feeling in the sound of the name, right?
Yeah.
That's all you got, because he's going down a list pretty fast, but it's important that we hear that. Because if I don't connect with that, if I don't see that he has an intense emotional connection with each of those guys, when he gets to we few, we happy few, we band of brothers, I don't believe they're brothers. I have to believe they are at that point. Yeah. And the only way that happens is by, again, embracing that language, even as something as simple as the sound of someone's name. What's in a name, Juliet says. And yet she spends an amazing kind of an incredible amount of energy in saying the word Romeo. Yeah, right. In those 3 syllables or 2 syllables, depending on how you say it, Romeo, right? And in tasting the name in her mouth. And the same thing goes here for Henry. How does he taste these names? They mean something to him, because the probable outcome of today is that all of those men are not going to be standing anymore. He may be the last time he shakes their hand and says thank you. This is his only chance to thank them before most of them will sacrifice their lives. Now, it turns out, spoiler alert, that they win, right? And it's actually historically accurate. One and only sacrificed a very few, a number of their soldiers, around 25, versus the hundreds that were lost on the side of, thousands possibly on the side of the French. It was a crazy upside down battle for many reasons other than God ordained it. It was, the weather and all the stuff, and it's bad planning and on the French and stuff, but it was a miraculous victory. Indeed, as I showed you this Laurence Olivier, which is a great version of the play, the movie, very, very different than Branagh's version, may not play in the same way to our contemporary senses, but that film version of 1940 was made as basically a propaganda piece, as a morale booster for the British public, who were at the time being under Nazi Luftwaffe bombardment on almost a daily basis. So plays can be put to, these plays are very malleable, and it's actually a study in the kind of incredible variety, flexibility of Shakespeare, that 2 such different versions of this play, and it's look at what war is, you can see on film. It's a great actual juxtaposition, and the play still, the greatness of the play still resonates despite the kind of conceptual change in the focus and what we learn from time. Jeff, thank you so much. That was just such a gloss on these things to kind of even get to do. So great to hear you do the bulk of that last part of the speech. And I sincerely hope that you do get to play this and Hamlet, and just not at the bus stop. For the bus stop players, me and you will go out. That's where it's going, right? I mean, I don't know what's going to happen to the theater. Look for us at a bus stop near you.
Near you, yeah.
I would say, yeah, I would normally say the library, or, the basement of the library, but we're not even going to be able to go into those for a while. So the bus stop, proper social distancing at Kennedy Plaza is hard. So I don't know. It's a lot of people down there, but just as we sign off, there's one more question Kaylee asked. Jeff, I'll ask you, you were asked, what was your role your favorite role you haven't played yet? What's your favorite you've played so far?
Oh, that's tough. They're all incredible. I really love playing Septimus Hodge. That was a lot of fun. That's really, oh yeah, what a play. What
again,
language.
Septimus in Arcadia, yeah. I actually had a suggestion from Gail, who's our marketing director, about going on, you know, our next episodes of this. And she goes, "What about brush up your stoppard?" And I think so. Speaking of which I think we will definitely look at. So that's a great suggestion, Gail. And somewhere down the road, we'll be talking about the great Tom Stoppard, who shares a lot with this author. And of course, we'll be doing travesties at some point next year. And so maybe we'll take a good look at that play, which is of course connected to Importance of Being Earnest, and has a lot, and which is the production we just did a couple of years ago. So maybe we'll have some fun with that. We won't even have to change the acronym of the show. Jeff, thank you so much. I will talk to you very, very soon. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week with another version. Please, tune in. This will be up on YouTube, or, spread the good word. And we hope you stay safe. Have a good weekend. And remember your proper social distance. See ya.